Thanks, Craig and Red, for sharing before. And thanks, Gwenda, for reading that amazing passage. If you weren't here last week, I don't always say this, but I'd encourage you to go and watch that sermon. These 2 weeks are linked in together. Last week we had the same reading in our service, that God's going to do more than we can imagine or even ask for through the church for generations. Unbelievable statement. Through the way He's worked His love deeper into us, the way we appreciate more of the bigness of God's love, that's going to happen. It's such a profound idea. And so last week we looked at the implications for intimate relationships. And this week we're looking for the implications for reaching those furthest from God. And so we're going to spend some time looking in Acts chapter 17. So if you've got a Bible, pull it up. Acts chapter 17, it's a very well-known passage. I'll read the words in a second here. But I just want you to recognise, so when I grew up, I went to local primary school, Widemeer Public School, and it was a brilliant little school. But I was the only kid for about 3 years who wore a tie. Actually, a whole lot of staff, so I didn't even realise we had a school tie until I turned up with a tie. Dad said, you've got to learn a Windsor knot, you've got to learn to wear a tie, blah, blah, blah. Oh, all right. So I was one of 3 kids in the school in the end over my time there who wore a tie. And whatever that meant, it actually meant I created an internal narrative where I felt like I was an outsider looking in. I was the odd one out. But it actually created a way I experienced myself. Then when I went to high school, partway through year 8, I had the privilege of going to a city school, which was a huge commitment for my family. Amazing school to go to. But here's the thing. Again, I was stepping into another world. That's how I felt. There was only one other person in our neighbourhood who got the train to that school. And I felt like the outside looking in, because every time we go to school events, we're turning up in the rusty old FC Holden next to the Mercedes-Benz and the Beamers in the car park. So I felt, again, like an outsider looking in. And it's interesting how I've noticed in life, I think every human being in the end experiences alienation. That all human beings, at different points, even in all of their life or big seasons in their life, have that common experience of feeling alienated from everyone else. Feeling like we're an outsider. Feeling like we're peering in, and it's a significant human reality. Now here's the thing, when you become a Christian, become part of a local church fabric, it's amazing how you can forget what it was like to be lost. You can forget what it was like to not know God, know the God who's created you and loves you and pursues you. And we can start building our own internal narrative, thinking that people, just because they're outside of the church, they're not interested or pursuing God at all. And that's a big mistake. It's a big mistake. Like, just in my simple connection with people across a wide spectrum of backgrounds, whether they've been connected to crystals, connected to the New Age movement or astrology, connected to breakaway cults like the Watchtower Society or the Mormons, or people who are connected to, say, a Hindu background, a Buddhist background, a Muslim background. I can tell you, I know the gamut there of people who are desperately seeking for a real possibility with God. They are very open to God, even though they're outside of the church. In fact, I know people who have such deep and dark backgrounds as Anglican, Presbyterian, and Baptist, and you'll believe it, they're even open to God. So here's the thing, it's a wrong thing to decide just because someone's outside the church, they're not desperately seeking God. And we're looking at the book of Acts, and there's something profound. If you don't know much about the Bible, don't worry. The first 4 books of the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all about Jesus. The next one is the book of Acts, and it's so well named. It's not the book of thoughts. Even the book of beliefs is the book of Acts. Because when Jesus Christ came, lived, died, rose again, the significance of that was demonstrated by the actions of his early followers, not just the ideas. It's called the book of Acts. If you're writing a chapter in your own life of a relationship with Jesus, you've got your own book of Acts. And it's how it always happens. Our beliefs and ideas fuel our actions, don't they, in everyone's life. And so it's very significant just to think about what it might mean to be connected to what God is doing in reaching those furthest. Let's have a look at this. Acts 17, verse 16, the words are up here. We're following in particular here Paul's journey, and he's at a place called Athens. So just try to pick up the story. While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with both Jews and God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace day by day with those who happened to be there. A group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to debate with him. Some of them asked, "What is this babbler trying to say?" Others remarked, "He seems to be advocating foreign gods." They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. Then they took him and brought him to a meeting of the Areopagus, where they said to him, "May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? You are bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we would like to know what they mean." All the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there spent their time doing nothing but talking about and listening to the latest ideas. Paul then stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, "People of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around to look carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' So you are ignorant of the very thing you worship, and this is what I am going to proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth and does not live in temples built by human hands, as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. From one man he made all the nations that they should inhabit the whole earth. And he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as some of your poets have said, we are his offspring. Therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by human design and skill. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. For he has set a day when he would judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. He has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead." When they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some of them sneered and others said, "We want to hear you again on this subject." At that, Paul left the council. Some of the people became followers of Paul and believed. Some of them, among them was Dionysius, a member of the Areopagus, and a woman named Damaris, and a number of others. Profound passage of scripture. I'm just going to pray, ask us to. Father, we ask for your help. We ask that you'd speak to us tonight, and we thank you that you show up in moments like this around the scriptures. We ask that you would speak personally to each of us, things that you want us to become aware of about you and about us, and about where you've placed us. We ask, God, that we become more aware of your presence and activity through the scriptures tonight. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Now, when you have the life of Paul on view, you've got one of the most extraordinary humans in all of history. There's no one quite like Paul. See, Paul, as a Jew, hated Christianity. And he was responsible for organising the deaths and persecution of many Christians. He wanted to wipe out Christianity, right? He was offended by the whole thing. Then he has a life-changing encounter with Jesus at a place called the Damascus Road. And then goes, you know what? I reckon Caesar needs to have a conversation about Jesus. I mean, who has the audacity of this guy? Only someone who could be about killing Christians and then, I want the most powerful guy on the planet right now to have a conversation about Jesus. And his strategy, because he's a Roman citizen, a well-known Hebrew, but he doesn't have enough clout to make it happen. So he assumes he's going to get imprisoned, appeal to Caesar, and then he's going to be in the room and talk about Jesus. That's an amazing perspective, an amazing commitment. He's on his way there, and it's this place called Athens. And I want you to notice what's so significant here is the people he connects to. Just look at the end before we go to the beginning. Verse 33, look at who responds. At that, Paul left the council, right? So they sneer at him, they mock him, they say, you got nothing. At that, Paul left the council. Some of the people became followers of Paul and believed. Among them was Dionysius, a member of the Areopagus, and Damaris. Now, I don't know if you noticed the rub that's not fitting here, but it wasn't Matthew and Peter or Mary who responded. It was Dionysius and Damaris. These names don't fit. They're biblical names, but they're not like what you're used to. John and Peter and Mark and Martha and Caleb and Joshua. No. Dionysius. He's named after the pagan god of drunkenness and debauchery. I'm pretty confident there's no one here called Dionysius. Would that be true? It's a biblical name, though. He's got cred. He's following Jesus soon. Like, what's the problem? We like Caleb, but why don't we like Dionysius? I mean, what parent's going to go, I name you Dionysius after the pagan god of drunkenness. May this be your destiny, my son. Like, he's going to say that. It just doesn't work. So you've got to notice the converts to faith don't match the culture of faith. This is very significant in the rub. If you're going to be a part of God reaching those furthest from him, that's a reality that's going to always be there. And I love what Luke says. He says, and some became followers of Paul in that verse. Did you notice that? Some became followers of Paul. Some say, oh, this means he's a follower of Jesus. But actually, I'm afraid Dr. Luke is very clear. He's writing an accurate account. He means what he says. They became followers of Paul. It's very significant. You've got to recognize this. See, if you're reaching out to people who already believe in Jesus and God, they can sidestep you and go straight to Jesus when they're ready. But you see, if you're talking to people who've never heard the name of Jesus, who've never even considered the possibility of them and God, they're going to have to follow you before they follow the God you follow. Do you follow me? So they become followers of Paul before they become followers of Jesus. It's so significant because Paul was the only person they knew who had actually met Jesus. And so some people now, they're not ready to say yes to God. They're not ready to say yes to Jesus, but they're ready to say yes to you. If you like to say, listen, I want to walk with you. If you let me, I want to come in your space. I want to see if you're real. I want to check if what's inside of you is worth me giving my life to. This is one of those dynamics you've got to recognize is so significant here. See, a lot of historians actually say this is a big failure moment for Paul. It's really interesting. They say Paul failed here at Athens. And it's partly due to his response. You make a comparative view of the first sermon Peter gave at Pentecost. Everyone wants every Sunday to be Pentecost Sunday because 3,000 people confess belief in Jesus and get baptized, and that's just the blokes. So thousands. That's amazing. So different to here because that was Jewish Israel who were scattered. They came together to celebrate the Passover in Jerusalem, and they were primed for that moment. They had all the promises of Isaiah, of one who was going to come. They knew the words of the Torah and the prophets, and when Peter spoke, they were ready to hear. And so here's a metaphor people use when they talk about people giving their life to Jesus. They talk about sowing a seed, a plant growing, and harvesting a crop. You've probably heard of that imagery. So when Peter gave his sermon at Pentecost, where so many responded, he actually, he reaped a harvest that he actually personally didn't sow. You notice that? That had been in tow for generations, planning that moment. And here's one of the challenges for a church like us. We can be so desperate to justify our ministries, to justify the money we spend on different initiatives, that we only choose to reach out where the harvest is ripe. And we don't take the responsibility to plough up the fallow land where people who are furthest from God have a chance to process what it might look like. It's actually a very significant thing to think about. What does it mean to think about reaching those who are furthest from God? So let's go back to the front. You've seen some of the rub that's always going to be true here. Well, let's look at verse 16 because this is so good. It shows us not just what Paul did, but his motivation for doing it. Verse 16. While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see the city was full of idols. You heard us talking to Craig and Red about this. He was distressed to see the city was full of idols. I love what this says. It means at least, of all the things it could mean, we know it means at least two things. One, Paul knows there's one true God worthy of our worship, not receiving it. He's like indignant about that. At the same time, he's compassionate because he sees people reaching out to gods that can't save them, with ears that can't hear and eyes that can't see and hands that can't reach out and save. And so he's distressed, right? Because he sees people trying to do life without God who desperately need God. And this is so significant because this is the basis on which the rest of the story happens. If Paul was not both at the same time indignant, frustrated, and concerned and compassionate, he would not have had the courage to step out to what he does next, day by day, verse 17 in the synagogue. And he would not be invited to the Areopagus. If he wasn't compassionate, they wouldn't have invited him. But if he didn't have the courage, he wouldn't have even stepped out. So you've got to recognize there's something profound it tells about his motivation. And he highlights idols. Now look, we could talk all night about this. This is huge because as Craig and Red started to allude to, there's idols everywhere. The human heart, we're told, is an idol factory. And an idol is anything that consumes our imagination and heart more than God. Anything. And the confusing thing, an idol can be a good thing. That's sort of where we say, listen, God, you can do whatever you want. I'll say yes to everything except don't touch this. And you wrap your hand around it and that becomes the idol. Could be my health, could be my money, could be a relationship, could be my hopes for the future, for my kids or for my life or my anything. And when you do that, that's destructive to you. That's an example of idols. And we as humans make terrible exchanges. We exchange the living God for things like that. Now notice what Paul does though. Verse 17 said, so he reasoned, because of his being disturbed by what he saw, he reasoned in the synagogue. It's very significant to notice where Paul goes here. You could look at the whole passage through what he saw, what he felt, what he said, what he did. If you wanted to, you could break it up those sort of ways. And so it's significant that he goes to the synagogue first. And I think this tells something about a human nature. See, he was a Jew, so he knew how to talk to Jews. And he was a Roman citizen, he knew how to talk to Romans. But at the moment, so he goes to a home game. This is like home turf for him in the synagogue. He talks to Jews and God-fearing Greeks. So the Greeks who had showed up to their synagogue, they're already keen on the scriptures. They got open ears. So this is home turf. This is like a comfortable space for him. Now, I want you to notice something though. Even if Paul was 100% successful in the synagogue, he would not have affected the city of Athens. Not a chance. All those idols would still be there. So the reality is, Paul does something that we often do. See, often we say, this is my vision, and then make decisions again and again that betray that vision. Like we might say, we want to reach people, the world for Jesus, and then every decision is about reaching Christians for church. You've got to notice, this creates an opportunity for us to reflect honestly about what we do and why we do it. So let's think about what home feels like. Home, you can kick your shoes off, you can relax, that's home. And church for us is like home. You're used to this maybe, you know what's going on. This is a space that, if you like, is like Paul's space in the synagogue. It's sort of a space that works for us. It's like home for us. I want you to think about some of the dynamics though in why we choose the spaces we do and how we shape them the way we do. And this is very telling of us blokes, by the way. So just a bit of free advice. Girls, if you want to attract a guy, here's what relationship experts will say. How girls attract guys? I get interested in this stuff all the time. You just mimic all their mannerisms. So you mimic their facial expressions, you mimic their hand gestures, you mimic how they stand, you mimic what they laugh at. And before you know it, they are zoned in on you. And I just think the more I hear that stuff, I think, guys, are we that shallow that we're just looking for ourselves everywhere? There's only one person we really love. It's terrifying to me to think I'm looking for a female version of me. I don't want to wake up in 30 years and look at an old version of myself. It's crazy to think about this. But actually, why is it that some people you go, I really like that guy. I really like that guy. I think she's awesome. Why do you like them? Because, you enjoy yourself. You love seeing yourself. That's half the reason. So when Craig said we like staying in our lane, we absolutely do. We like staying around people like us, who talk like us, who dress like us, who think and even believe like us. We love that. So it's very important to recognise one of the dynamics here at play as we create our space here. Now, home is very important in terms of what we're talking about, people coming to know Christ who don't. Jesus, John 17, he prays that we will be one, not just for the sake of oneness. He doesn't say, I want you to be unified for the sake of unity. He says that we will be one so that the world might know about Jesus. That's amazing. So just bring that into our conversation about home here. There's something about being at home in the fabric of relationships, bonds of friendship that we can have in the church that is crucial to what God's doing in the world. It's so important to be around doing life with people who believe like you, who affirm the same values, who encourage you in following Christ, in being faithful to Him, all that stuff. That's needed. It's essential, isn't it? You need to be in relationship to other people who follow Jesus and know you and you know them. So Jesus puts it up front in terms of His mission in the world. But let's recognise something that's so clear, implicit in the whole, everything that's said about the church, the theological nerdy word ecclesiology, that while we are meant to focus on being at home with the tribe of God and learn the significance of that and create a place of home here, we're not just meant to create a place of home that's just for us. We're meant to create a home for those who don't have a home. See, the church isn't meant to just be a fortress protecting us from the world, but a place where anyone who's hurt and broken and disturbed and desperately seeking reality with God can come and find Him with you. And so people who go, I don't even know where I belong in the world, but they're calling me home, I'm going here. What does it mean that we're called to create a space like that? That's not just for us. My wife Martine grew up in a family that took her to every Christmas to a caravan park, and they did kids' holiday programs. The mission group came down and they did that every single holiday. And it was only at the end of her school life that she gave her heart to Jesus. That's like best of 16 years. Are we willing to create spaces where people get the freedom to process what it might look like to be in relationship to Jesus? Where it might take 18 years for someone to say yes. So many of us, our gut says we know God's there, but we need time for our mind to catch up. Are we willing to create spaces here that aren't just home for us? Now, here's the thing. If Paul wasn't what we said, both at the same time compassionate and indignant, nothing else would have happened in this story. Because see, look at verse 17. It says, he reasoned in the synagogue with both Jews and God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace. Now, unless he had that indignant, this is not right, he would not have had the courage to go day by day into the marketplace. But verse 17, he transitions from his home turf to like middle ground. Marketplaces where everyone does life. You do life Monday to Saturday in the marketplace. Whatever you're doing. If you're at school, if you're a teacher, if you're a plumber, if you're a stay-at-home mum, doesn't matter if you're retired, if you're just at home, whatever you do, that's the marketplace. Now, I don't know if you recognise this, but Athens wasn't the power centre of the known world. That was Rome. They defeated the Greeks, but it was the intellectual centre of the world, of the Greco-Roman world. It's very significant. So when it says marketplace, what do you guys think? I reckon you guys think shopping, don't you? And if it's a big one, you think, okay, Costco, where every time you go, you come back with enough supplies to the year 3000. It's a huge shopping centre. That's not what it means. This is like, maybe you could think of it as a media centre. You see, they didn't have magazines and books, newspapers. How do you find the news? You go to the marketplace. How do you find what's happening? Go to the marketplace. How do you find the latest philosophical ideas? Go to the market. How do you find the latest political debates? You go to the marketplace. What about art and business and finance and literature? All that stuff happens at the marketplace. And so that's where Paul goes. And the first thing I want you to notice is Paul's posture. Straight away, he recognised the gospel is not just for him. The gospel is for everyone. He takes the gospel to the marketplace. It's for the culture. It's for the public space. It's for everyone. It is not for him. Last year, we went through the book of 2 Timothy, and Paul told us, how do you guard the gospel? Give it away. 1 Timothy 2:2. Who are you giving it away to? That's how you guard it, not just keep it for you. It's not just for your healing. It's actually for everyone. So I love that he says, I'm taking it to the public space, the agora. But look what he did there. It's so awesome because he's reasoning. So he reasoned, verse 17 in the synagogue. Do you know, reasoning, this is not, he's not on a soapbox like you might see in Hyde Park. He's actually doing something different. This is Socratic reasoning, Socratic dialogue. Have you ever seen a political debate on TV and thought, I just wasted an hour? You ever had that experience? You with me? Actually, even any televised debate nowadays, even the best of apologists and thinkers, whatever topic, it's not the same as Socratic dialogue because you just see people going through their own talking points. Socratic dialogue is asking questions. It's listening to a premise. It's trying to understand where a person, and then in challenging them with your premise and trying to wrestle the nuance of that out. Now, that is a whole different level of engagement. It's like kindergarten stuff that we see on TV and YouTube. It's so much more significant for most of the stuff we watch. Socratic reasoning is amazing. And I love that he has the courage. So notice he's not just preaching and he's not just keeping it to himself. I think this is because of the way he's motivated with both compassion and he's got a no there. I've got to do something. And it's ironic. So verse 18 and 32, you're a babbler, you sneer at him, they mock him, right? That's so ironic because in 200-300 years, this has taken over the whole Roman world. So they're standing there saying, what person in their right mind, what intelligent person is going to believe this stuff? Well, in 300 years, every intelligent person pretty much believes this stuff. It's amazing how God used what was happening here, doing more than people could imagine, right? Why? Because in the end, the gospel can speak to the needs of the human heart, of the reality of the human experience of life, of culture, better than anything else. And as Tim Keller used to say, it speaks to the underbelly of every culture. At some point, every culture fails to give people what they really need. So notice it said here, there were Epicurean in verse 18 and Stoic philosophers, highlighting two schools of thought of ways of doing life. The Stoics, they were about a moralistic good life, living a noble, upright life, and don't be knocked around by the world. Hold it together, right? Stay the course. That's a Stoic position. The problem is, in the face of horrendous heartache and suffering, that doesn't work. It just doesn't work. The other one was an Epicurean approach to life, which said, listen, this is all there is, so live it up. Pleasure, happiness, fun, and for them, especially sexual pleasure was on the agenda because they were way more sexually progressive than our age fully. And why did that not hold up? Why is it in 200 years, the Christian sex ethic, which is up front so much more restrictive, sex is reserved only for a married relationship, why did that win? You see, because if you can have sex when you want, how you want, with whoever you want, in the end, that's an empty, hollow experience. Sex within a married commitment is a far more unifying, holistic, life-giving experience. See, the gospel offers something different. So there's some of the dynamics that are at play. But I want you to notice verse 19 is just beautiful. So Paul, he goes to home base, then he goes to middle ground like the marketplace, and then verse 19, then they took him and brought him to a meeting of the Areopagus, where they said, may we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting. You're bringing some strange ideas. Help us know what they mean. And so he's invited in. And this is something interesting that both Craig and Red said. Actually, when they went to Arnhem Land, you had to be invited in to make an impact. It's so significant. If Paul was just indignant, not compassionate, not respectful, there's no way they would have invited him in. This invitation is very significant. If Paul wasn't indignant, he was just like really kind to everyone, he wouldn't have had the courage to even go to the marketplace day by day. There's no way he could have done that Socratic reasoning. So there's something profound about how Paul's motivation creates the opportunity for verse 19. They invite him into their space. This is their home turf. Paul now is on an away game. And listen to what he says, verse 22. People of Athens, I've seen every way you're very religious. For as I walked around to look carefully at the objects of worship, I saw an altar with the inscription, to an unknown God. He says, so I want to show you, I want to talk about the one you say you don't know. And he's so respectful as he starts. If you knew something of Greek rhetoric and philosophy, you'd be blown away the different ways you can analyse this speech. It's beautifully constructed. For us, it goes over our head in the time we have. Now, I love the phrase, though, an unknown God, an agnostic God. And I think we're called to be prophets to an agnostic God. As Christians, I want you to notice the way Paul opens up the possibility of who God is to them. He gives them a comprehensive picture of God. Look at this from verse 24. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth. Doesn't live in temples built with human hands. Most of us would go, yep. And they would go, yep. If there is a being, which their thinkers have already posited the possibility of, there could be one behind everything here. Okay. He clearly wouldn't be dependent and live in a temple. And he's not served by human hands as if he needed anything. So we all get that. But rather, listen to this, rather he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. How big is that? He's saying there's a God who didn't just make everything, he's given you everything you have. He's not trying to convince them to pray a prayer and then suddenly God's going to start doing good things in your life. He's saying, listen, God's always been doing great things in your life. He gave you breath. He gave you everything. That's comprehensive. God's already here. He says, I'm not trying to bring you a God that you've never experienced, you've never had something to do with. Believe it or not, he's given you everything you've actually already got. This is like the Old Testament idea that God reigns over all, the righteous and the unrighteous. We're like fish in water. We're all wet. We don't even realise we're just swimming in the activity and presence of God. He's trying to wake them up to the activity of God. This is a seminal passage for my own life. So in my 30s and 40s, I came to my own little crisis point of faith where I had to work out what it is God's putting me here to do. Why I'm here in whatever scenario. I had the beautiful experience of 25 odd years at that stage of teaching music and piano. And that became a space and mission work for me to start to learn some things about God and myself, my own gift set mix. And I came up with, in the end, my own vision statement, my own mission statement. It's very personal. So this is the way I say it. And it very much comes out of what goes on here. Like I say, my purpose is to help everyone become more aware of the presence and activity of God in their lives. And the second thing I say, this is for me personally, through becoming an echo of his voice, that they might see the possibilities of life with God. So I'm saying that my whole goal, whether I'm buying milk, whether I'm working on a work site, whether I'm here in church life, wherever I am, I want to help whoever's in front of me become more aware of the presence and activity of God in their life by my words and actions being an echo of possibilities of life with God. And I've got to tell you, has been profoundly helpful for me making choices. Now I'm hitting 55 this year. I might only have 20, 30 years left. I want to make them count more. Once I passed 50, I started noticing, okay, there's some things I'm going to say no to. There's some things I'm not willing to do, but there's some things I am. What are they that connect to that mission? If I'm not able to do that stuff, then maybe it's actually peripheral to my life and my choices. I hope that's helpful to someone here. But notice the picture he gives. God is massive and he's knowable. Did you notice that? Notice what he says next. He says, verse 26, from one man he made all the nations that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. For 27. God did this, I love this, so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him. Though he's not far from any one of us. So God's choice to create every human being is connected to his mission, his goal, that they might know him. So God's presented as creator, as sustainer, as ruler, and he's knowable. And actually, he highlights in his language our sinful limitations. He uses a word for groping, reaching out. Homer uses the same word describing Cyclops in a mythology, and he talks about Asidius. He's captured by the Cyclops, and he stabs the Cyclops creature in the eye, and the Cyclops is groping to catch him. And that's what people are doing. They're groping to find God. We need God's help, God's grace to actually see him. We're like blind. It's significant, his description of humanity there. But God, he's saying everything, he's sticking on the stars, on everything is made by God. Not made in China. Made by God. So it's so significant. Paul's giving them a massive picture of who God is. So I wonder, how do you respond to all this? The Bible doesn't give you a pit-pat answer to anything. You know, a lot of us, we've had like a whole cultural experience for generations of an NCIS view of the world. You know NCIS, the show? They're all so interesting, aren't they? They're all so different. Not. So every single episode, if you've seen one, you've seen them all. There's a dead body at the bottom of the harbour. And then by the time the professionals in their nice suits and sunnies turn up and put the plastic gloves on, let's have a look. You find out there was a poker game, there was a hitman, there was a Mercedes. You've worked out the whole scenario. The director is just peeling back the curtain. So at the end of the NCIS episode, you've got no questions. Problem solved. Is that not right? That's how they work. It's like any one of the Bourne movies. Why did you even watch the trailers? You know every time there was a head injury, a ninja kick. How did he do that? Every single time. There's nothing else happening. It's just so on repeat. Now, if you think that's the way God's going to give us answers for life, that's just moved reality down another layer for you. Because that's not how life happens. The gospel invites you to a reality that actually provokes far more questions than sit there, I've got it all solved. When people come into us, we've talked about our food distribution ministry in the last sort of month a bit. When people come in and actually have the courage to say, the range of experiences from being removed for police protection interstate to be here, to having the most important person in their life betray them and nick off and now they're stuck, to people who just have not got money for the next meal, all the range of things that people are willing to talk about. It's not an easy life, is it? See, life is not like an NCIS episode. And the gospel opens up, Paul, the resurrection of Jesus opens up even more possibilities and even more questions. So how do you respond to this? Do you go, oh look, that Paul's a preacher. This is good for him, not for me. Is that what you do? Because if that's how you respond to this, you're actually missing the principle of the Bible. That is right. Paul is a preacher. And so his application here is going to be different to yours. But make no mistake, when Jesus comes into your life, he does not just simplify it, he opens the door to change every part of it. He doesn't just affect what you do on a Sunday. He affects how you watch movies, how you go to work, how you deal with money, how you deal with friendships, how you deal with enemies. He affects every part of your life experience. Which means, how do you deal with the things that confront and disturb you? What's your hell no? You look at our world and you go, no way. I'm going to stand against that. Do you also have compassion for what you see? You see, what Paul did, he brought the cross right into the center of his life choices. Where you see there's a no on the cross and a yes on the cross at both the same time. How do you respond? This is so significant, how you choose to be faithful in the midst of what you're confronted with in the world. And what's so good about Paul, he emulates Christ. He's distressed by the idols he sees, and he doesn't walk away. He throws himself into the middle of the marketplace knowing he's going to get mocked. But in such a greater way, Jesus, looking from heaven, saw all the darkness in every human heart. He didn't abandon us. He threw himself right into the middle of the marketplace knowing he wouldn't just get mocked, he'd get killed. Wow. And then beats the power of death. That story, it's not an NCIS story. That story is like a bomb. Paul, multiple times in this passage we're told, he talks about this resurrection, that this changes the game. There is going to come a day where all forms of death will be gone. And that opens up new freedoms, actually new questions. Why am I here? Why did God put me in this family? Why have I had to go through these challenges? Why am I in Campbelltown? Why can't I get that people group on the other side of the planet out of my mind? What is it that God is prompting us to respond to? Because I know he is. It's profound, that passage that we had read before Acts tonight, that God's going to do more than you can even dream up through his people. It's going to reach beyond our generation. It's amazing what God's going to do. Now, as we close, if you were here last week, I quickly introduced the idea of intimate space. Do you remember those little circles? Who was here last week? You saw the thing? Yeah. That's our human experience. We all live in these different spaces. Intimate space, personal space, social space, and public space. They say it takes a village to raise a kid. A kid needs all those spaces for a healthy human experience. Let me quickly define them. We're going to race through this. You ready, Josh? So intimate space is 2 to 4 people who know you all, you know them all. Personal space is like groups of 5 to 12, like a small group experience where you journey with people and it's a growth moment. If you do life with someone, you learn from them, they learn from you, that sort of space. Then you have social space. It's a bigger group of people that actually do life together. And then you've got public space like right here, right? Like bigger space. Now, if you go to the next slide, all those spaces matter to Jesus. There's something significant that he very intentionally lent in to each of those spaces. So consider the first one, intimate space. He confided in the 3. He was closer to Peter, James and John than other disciples. So intimate relationships really were intentional for Jesus. They mattered. And personal space really mattered because he trained the 12 disciples. If you go to the next one, he trained the 12. He was always pulling them aside, explaining, breaking their prejudices, helping them see life different, doing miracles together, rebuking, encouraging. So he trained the 12. And then he mobilized, next slide, he mobilized the 70. Multiple times he sent disciples on mission trips to heal, to pray and to preach about the kingdom. And then the last, the public space, he spoke riddles to the crowds. He spoke parables to the crowd. So you notice that you could take those 4 spaces through the Gospels and start to identify what Jesus is doing here. And it is intriguing how it helps you open up how important each of those spaces are to him. Now think about this. If God is going to work in us, those spaces matter. If God's going to work through us, we've got to start to realize they're not the same, are they? For example, this one, public space, It's good for inspiring people. It's good for learning things, big ideas about God and yourself. But it is a bad space to bare your soul. Right? Intimate space is brilliant for bearing your soul. So they're different. Now, most churches do this. Most churches focus, and nothing wrong with this, on these two spaces we said last week. They focus on personal space, growth group space, and this one, services. We put most resources into both those spaces. Nothing wrong with that. We've got a small group program. We've got services that happen on routines. But there's two other forms of human belonging that are clearly missing, aren't they? Last week, we looked at intimate space, how significant that is. If you didn't see the talk, John 1, where Nathanael is seen by Philip to be seen fully by Jesus. Who do you see was the question last week. But today we're talking about, actually, I want us to extend what you've just heard to the idea of social space. We haven't got time, we're not going to do it now, but in a little while, I'm going to get us on a Sunday night to ask 3 questions of you in small groups. And if this is one of the questions I was going to ask you, what are the 3 challenges, for example, to reaching people who are furthest from God? I reckon one of those challenges is going to throw up in our group is going to be doing it on your own is really hard. It just gets so demoralizing. It gets defeating. It's really hard to do it on your own. But you see, Jesus grew his disciples by sending them out in teams. And I started to think last year, that's what I spend most of my life doing. Most of my time in any given year is taking a group of anywhere from 20 to 70 people to reach those who don't yet know the love of Christ, to help them organise and mobilise and use their gifts to do that. Well, what I'm hoping to do, a new initiative for us as a church, is that over the next couple of years, I'm going to spend time with different Bible study leaders and try to actually create some groups that might come together. Not to change their Bible study groups, they can do what they want, their growth groups, as they meet whatever night. But it might look like something like this. You might have some people who already meet on a Wednesday night that maybe once a term, they might meet with 2 or 3 other groups, and then you've got a group of about 50 people. And then Martin and I were going to come to that group and spend time with them each term. We start to ask the question, what might it look like if God was going to use us to reach this network of people in the neighbourhood or this network of people in the neighbourhood? And so as a church, this opens the door to us actually being far more intentional about how we reach out in meaningful ways to people who are furthest from God. Does that make sense? Like, you're with me a little bit? So we're going to bring this up a little bit more during the year. Some of the groups I meet with might start to actually be the test cases for that. We've started even talking to the West Side people from the West Side service. And so I'm just going to ask the question already. If you're someone who has a heart and interest in reaching the neighbourhood of West Side who haven't attended our church for maybe ever. There's so many people, even though that neighbourhood is getting redeveloped, who don't know Jesus, who matter to God. If you're interested in reaching that neighbourhood, come and speak to me. Because mid-next term, we're going to start one of our get-togethers for people who might want to be involved in an initiative there. And we're going to start asking the question, what might it look like for us to reach that neighbourhood with a group of us, not just you on your own. Like, good luck this week. We don't want that. So I hope you find that maybe encouraging of some of the things I want us to look at next year. Just think about the possibilities. We've been doing, I don't know, carols in the park for maybe more than 20 years, you reckon? Pretty long time. Hey? That's a long time, right? So carols in the park now is literally, if you look up Koshigai Park, it's on the map. The Google map says carols in the park, Koshigai Park, Christmas event, a seasonal event. That's pretty amazing that in that amount of time, there is a very significant local reputation that that's something we make happen. What would it look like in the next decade if, as a church, we developed a reputation for literally doing a really effective, meaningful job of reaching those furthest from Christ as mission teams in the normal rhythm of everyday life of our church? Not giving you busy work, not freaking everyone out and exhausting them, but working together with more intention. How exciting might that look? So there's a bit of a view of maybe what we might be looking at. So I'm going to ask our music team to come up and they'll lead us in song. We're going to close our service. So you guys who want to come up. Father, thank you for your word. We ask that you continue to speak to us as we sing and then as we we hang out together after the service. Amen.